Good afternoon. On behalf of the family, I want to give you a very special welcome to come as we have come to honor and pay our respects to the family and support the family for this occasion. And we are thankful that you are here. And I want to invite you to bow your heads with me as I pray. Our gracious Father, what a privilege it is to celebrate the life of Pat Foster. We're thankful for her many examples of good living and of organization and the skills she had. And we just pray that as we remember her life, that it will be an inspiration to us today. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. And we'll follow the program as you have it.
The scripture is taken from Isaiah chapter 65, verses 17 to 19, 24 and 25. Pay close attention now. I'm creating new heavens and a new earth. All the earlier troubles, chaos, and pain are things of the past to be forgotten. Look ahead with joy. Anticipate what I'm creating. I'll create Jerusalem as sheer joy. Create my people as pure delight. I'll take joy in Jerusalem. I'll take delight in my people. No more sounds of weeping in the city, no cries of anguish. Before they call, I'll answer. Before they finish speaking, I'll have heard. Wolf and lamb will graze the same meadow. Lion and ox eat straw from the same trough. But snakes will get a diet of dirt. Neither animal nor human will hurt or kill anywhere on my holy mountain, says God.
Thank you all so much for being here today. Your presence here means a great deal to our father, Dr. Glenn Foster, he and Patricia's children, including ourselves and 4 more, as well as other family members, a few of whom are here today also. I'm Ginger Schellenberger, chronologically 4th, and my brother Gary, 5th, in the lineup of the brood of Glenn and Pat. We have been given the honor of presenting her life story.
Thankfully, we have a full 60 minutes, and we'll try.
Patricia Joan Foster was born Patricia Joan Rappaport on October 3, 1934, in the borough of Manhattan, New York City, New York. She was the younger of 2 children of Reuben and Eva Rappaport. Her father, Reuben, born in New York City, was a physician who attended and graduated from Bellevue Hospital Medical College and began but did not complete a residency in radiology. His family were Jewish immigrants from Odessa, fleeing there between the pogroms in the late 19th century. Odessa was part of Russia then, later part of Ukraine. According to Mama, many of his family worked in the clothing industry. He was raised in the Jewish faith but was not a strict adherent. His mother, Eva May Clark, was born in Cambridge, Maine. She was the youngest of 9 children and of British Isles heritage. Coming from a farming family, she was the only child to leave the state or to pursue an education beyond high school, and she earned her registered nurse degree. She was also one of the very first nurses that was a public health nurse in the state of New York and served during the Great Influenza. She and her husband Reuben welcomed their first child, a son, Jerome Leslie, in July 1928. Eva was found to have had a weak heart that was also enlarged and cautioned to refrain from becoming pregnant again, as she would likely not survive if she did. Well, obviously she did. She lived a long life, almost to her 90th birthday. She was a Christian, a devout Seventh-day Adventist, and her mother had met Ellen G. White on one of her visits to the area that they lived in Maine.
Both of Patricia's parents worked, and she and her brother attended SDA schools most of the time. At one time, her father stated he did not want them to continue in SDA schools, so they were transferred to public schools. Mama recalled that shortly thereafter she contracted lice. This was treated, but her father was so disgusted that he removed Jerry and Pat from their respective schools, re-enrolling them both in Adventist schools. Unfortunately, Patricia's parents' marriage was an unhappy one. They were legally separated when she was 13 years old and divorced when she was 17 years old. Very soon thereafter, Eva dropped her surname and changed it back to her maiden name of Clark, as did Mom and her brother Jerome, nicknamed Jerry.
She, her mother, and brother moved out of state, and Patricia enrolled at Tacoma Park Academy in Maryland, graduating in 1951. The narrative entry next to her photo in her yearbook, school yearbook, read, "Patricia Clark," in quotes, Pat. Originality unlimited. A's her specialty. Never without her smile. Ask her anything. She always has an answer. Let's go in gathering. After academy graduation, Patricia enrolled at Southern Missionary College in Collegedale, Tennessee, majoring in pre-nursing. She dated several young men while there. One of them was one of the McKees, who had large bakeries, made Little Debbie cookies and snap cakes and other tasty treats. In 1952, she moved to Southern California to be near her mother and complete her nursing education. Now Loma Linda University School of Medicine affiliated. She was the youngest student in her class and lived in Kate Lindsay Hall dormitory. She was outgoing, had many friends while achieving excellent grades. She recalled treating patients afflicted by polio who were kept alive in iron lungs. She also told of non-pharmacologic treatments such as hydrotherapy administered in the Loma Linda Sanitarium. She strove to maintain an attractive, slender appearance as she gained weight easily and was a bit overweight at times. Apples were a favorite snack and somewhat filling, helping with this endeavor, and she at times ate them whole, core and all. Additionally, she said, "One day I just decided I should smile more." So I did. Some people said they remembered me as always being happy. I wasn't, but the smiling did help. She dated several young men during this time, the last being Charles Gillett. They became engaged in 1955.
They married December 26th that year at the Eagle Rock Seventh-day Adventist Church in Glendale, California, soon after her graduation from Loma Linda School of Nursing. Charles graduated from medical school the following spring. Following his graduation, they lived in the Los Angeles area for a short time before he started internship at Porter Sanitarium in Denver, Colorado. Their first child, a daughter, Terry Lee, was born March 12, 1957 in Denver. They were both thrilled. A little later, Charles accepted a commission from the United States Army to serve as a physician with the rank of captain for a 3-year term at the base in Münchweiler, West Germany, near Frankfurt. While there, they traveled to many countries throughout Europe and Egypt. Their second child, a daughter, Ginger Ann, was born at the U.S. Army Hospital there on October 18, 1959. During this time, Patricia and Charles met other fellow Adventists who became lifelong friends, at least two of whom are present today, Doris Borg and Mary Stokes. In the latter part of 1961, Patricia, Charles, and their two daughters moved back to the United States, settling in Hendersonville, Tennessee, where Charles joined his maternal uncle, Wesley Osborne's medical practice. On September 29, 1961, their third child, a son, Garrett Paul, as it was said, when I was in trouble, it was Garrett Paul, was born via cesarean section at Madison Hospital, delivered by Dr. Frederick Cothran, the same physician who delivered Johnny and June Cash's son. Just as an aside, Dr. Cothran was of the philosophy that held no virtue in childbirth pain. He provided heavy doses of Demerol to mothers in labor, ensuring they fell into a dreamy sleep and awoke with a cooing infant in their arms. My own disposition has been a bit somnolent ever since.
But we know how to rouse you. She was accepted into the Master of Science nursing program at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. She graduated with this degree in August 1963. She taught in the School of Nursing at Madison College in Madison, Tennessee. Two secretaries that worked in the office there, Helen Kramer and Frances, who we lovingly know as Frankie Gepford, were among her closest friends. Today we are honored and grateful to have one of each of these friends' daughters here with us. Today, Donna Hines, Frankie's daughter, and Helen's daughter, Mary Beth Cochran, whose daughter, Natalie Hohensee, will sing a solo during this service. After a few years, Charles began a solo medical practice in Hendersonville in a house dating back to the Confederacy, which had recently been converted to an office. His practice grew quickly, though he did take quite a risk by choosing to have an integrated waiting room, one of the first in the Nashville area. He and Patricia became active members of the Boulevard SDA Church in Madison and brought their children with them for Sabbath school and worship services. Patricia helped her children sit quietly during worship services by gesturing, certain facial expressions, and occasionally drawing pictures for them when they showed signs of restlessness. She also had either Cert's breath mints or Lifesaver candies, quietly distributing them one at a time for this purpose and to help her husband stay awake, as he was often sleep deprived. She had a great talent for organization on a personal and professional level. Personally, she enjoyed and was excellent at planning and preparing for family meals, parties, Sabbath lunches, often with guests, selecting home furnishings and clothing. She once took an oil painting course and created a few small still life pictures, one of which I was blessed to have for a while, that it was a victim of Hurricane Harvey, as Steve and I and our daughter were living on a barrier island in Texas in the Gulf of Mexico for a while. It was difficult trying to break into Southern society and learn its rules. For example, after attending a function at another's home, often the host or hostess, or both, would say, "Oh, please feel free to come by any time." Did not mean to do so. In fact, if one had not received a written and generally engraved invitation in the mail, he or she must not return to the dwelling. Our mother was an uncommonly driven career woman for that time. She loved being a student and an instructor. Likewise, with her children, it was important to her that they became educated, and this by attending a Seventh-day Adventist school as early as possible. When they were younger, they were enrolled in a non-Adventist kindergarten owned and operated by an elderly, wealthy female who was highly esteemed in the community and generally known as Miss Nanny. The focus was on learning courtesy, modesty, posture, manners, and respect towards adults. She held a graduation yearly, and if you missed a pardon me or didn't curtsy if you were a girl when you saw an adult, or bow if you were a boy, then you might not graduate. After this, they attended an Adventist preschool in Madison. Following this, they attended elementary school at Greater Nashville Junior Academy in Goodlettsville, Tennessee.
On January 29, 1968, they had their fourth and finest child, Gina Ray. She was born on the same day as her paternal grandmother. We were all very happy and excited with the news. We were a happy whole family. Unfortunately, 19 days later, this joy was tragically fragmented. On February 17, 1968, a Sabbath afternoon, shortly after leaving church, Charles was involved in a head-on motor vehicle accident. He did not have his seatbelt on and suffered multiple head and body injuries. He was unconscious and not expected to survive the night. He did, but his condition deteriorated, and a little less than 2 months later, on April 10, 1968, he died in the hospital. He was 38 years old. His death occurred 6 days after the assassination of 39-year-old Martin Luther King Jr. in Memphis, Tennessee. There were riots throughout the South. It was a time of curfews and chaos.
Pat was 33 years old with 4 children, a single adult. This would be daunting for the bravest and boldest. She found that there were just too many memories, mostly of happier times surrounding her at home and when traveling to and from work, church, shopping, and otherwise. She was offered and accepted the offer of employment as nursing instructor and an administrative role as well at Loma Linda University School of Nursing, which had very recently moved to its current location of West Hall, across the street from the older hospital, which was also new then. By July, she had sold the Hendersonville, Tennessee house and purchased a 4-bedroom house just up the street from her new work site. That summer, she and her 4 children moved there and began a new life chapter. She had an adventurous, fun-loving spirit much of the time when she was with us, and able to break away from the throes of her career, its demands, or mourning the loss of her husband and the ever-present emptiness and loneliness. She was able to readily rally, exhibit a can-do, stiff upper lip with upright posture stance when the circumstances called for it. She loved the outdoors. Relaxing for her often consisted of reclining in a lounge chair or resting on a blanket on the backyard lawn with a book or magazine of interest to her, a tab, cola, or fresca at her side. Stale bread was not to be discarded. It was for feeding the ducks. At local public parks, we had many picnics, trips to parks, mountains, and beaches. In the summer months, trips to the beach were at least weekly. She enjoyed singing in the car when traveling with us, and also otherwise. One song she nearly always wanted us to sing in the car as a 2-part round was Everybody Oughta Know, with the ought to pronounced oughta. Several of us started piano lessons. She taught us to think of others, to share and take turns, and give to those who were poor. She often sorted through her and our clothing and many of our toys to donate them to the local thrift shop. But Mommy, we're still playing with them. Her response was, well, other children don't have anything to play with and need them, and that was that. A few especially lasting memories were made. We will share a few here. A walk on foot comes to mind. It was a hot summer Sunday afternoon. Mother decided our family needed to take a walk to the Assistencia Mission in Redlands from our Campus Street house. She pushed Gina in a stroller while the rest of us walked and walked and trudged and sweated. However, a bright spot was the discovery that next to the mission was a large several-story mansion with a sign that advertised horseback riding lessons. Mother thought this was a great idea, as we did, and soon signed us up for these. Even Gina took lessons starting when she was less than 3 years of age. Mother had a fear, as many of us females and maybe a few males do, of spiders, other insects, bugs, reptiles, and rodents. A little while after her husband Charles had died, she discovered a small mouse on the kitchen floor. She screamed, closed the doors to the kitchen, and immediately had all of us climb up on the sofa, ensuring our feet were on the sofa to save us from the mouse. Then called a pest control service. The rodent was taken care of. Then she allowed us to get down from the sofa. But alas, the kitchen and living room were flooded. As the sinks were stoppered in the kitchen and the water was left running from the faucet.
Lessons from Mom. Every 2 weeks on Friday afternoons, Mom treated me to a ritualistic pilgrimage to Redlands that taught 2 fundamental lessons. One, that suffering is a prelude to a happy future, but that happy future will surely erode in large, unfair bites. The second was how words contain a broad range of interpretations. Heady stuff for a 6-year-old boy. The trip began with light conversation shared in a blue Chevy Malibu, but I was well aware of the suffering and rewards that lay ahead. A quickening pulse and clenched throat imposed itself as we pulled into the open parking space in front of the shop. Pungent aromas of barbicide and baby powder knocked us involuntarily on our heels as through coughing and watering eyes, the white-smocked barber, a rotund, humorless man, whacked the leather seat with his damp towel. "All right, young man, up you go." Mom smiled approvingly at the man, condoning his cruel ritual of boyhood. And so, like Isaac, a lamb forced to climb his own sacrificial altar, I climbed on up. I made my way up and sat on the shiny green leather. The towel was fastened tightly around my neck. Then behind me, the sound of tools clattering in the barbicide jar, then sharpening on the leather strop in anticipation of the suffering to come. I wished to send him back to barber school, where he could learn that fundamental lesson: open the scissors prior to lifting. Snip, open, then lift. This man embraced a different sequence, that of snip, lift, then open. No angel of Yahweh arrived. Yelps, winces, and tears poured forth as hairs were uprooted from their follicular homes. Between yelps, I contemplated the virtues of Samson against the perils of Absalom. Mom was indifferent to the events as the barber applied the shiny, straight-edged razor to the strop, then to my neck. The razor was as dull as the scissors, scratching hairs from their roots with the tender boy flesh. 55 years later, I shudder at the aroma of barbicide and baby powder. Out the door, scalp and neck stinging in the fresh air, I was free and alive, and the promised land was in sight. Baskin Robbins. Mom and I crossed the erstwhile sticks and entered the heavenly fragrance of baked sugar cones, approaching a most holy glass protected with 31 flavors. With rituals of his own, a priest of creams rolled 2 sacred scoops, pralines and cream, chocolate peanut butter, lifting each with delicate confidence atop the brown cone, pressing each securely in place. At a young age, I developed a methodology, and it conflicted with Mom's. My approach is to lick circumferentially, to collect the drips as they come down. As the scoop becomes progressively smaller, it's then pressed into the cone with the tongue, such that one has a mix of cone and ice cream to the very end. It takes practice and patience to master the finer points of this method, but it offers the greatest rewards of savoring and control, a small world to be sure, but my own very own space of heaven. Could I have just a taste? Mom asked innocently enough. Thinking to myself, here's my benevolent mother who, after all, paid for this wonderful treat and eventually removed me from the sadistic barber, and it was just a taste. It dawned on me too late that she wanted just a taste because she had already finished her ice cream. A disciple of the biting approach, Mom could down a double scoop ice cream cone faster than anyone. It was just one of those unusual gifts some people possess. In the future, I learned to pace my ice cream consumption accordingly, but for now, I learned the lesson that just a taste was a phrase with a broad range of interpretations. I was left with a small, heavily taxed wreck of what I had started with. My small heaven brought to earth. Mom smiled and wrinkled her nose. That's good. Can I have another taste? In that great reunion to come, where barbers are kind and respect follicular homes, when we reunite with Mom, remember that even in paradise, just a taste may mean more than you think.
Mom dated several men in the community, each a disappointment in some way. We couldn't help but compare each to our daddy who had died. Besides, we weren't exactly pleased with the prospect of sharing her with anyone, especially as she was so busy all the time, away at work and serving also with the church and other community activities. However, a huge however, we hated her being so lonely and unhappy. Then, in the winter of 1971, she was reintroduced to Glenn Foster, a Seventh-day Adventist cardiologist whose wife had died in September 1969. Patty and Glenn met at least once briefly when Charles was alive, when they traveled to Birmingham, Alabama briefly. Glenn was a classmate freshman year medical school with Charles. Then Glenn waited a year so that he could graduate with his wife a year later in 1957. Dr. and Mrs. Harvey Elder, who served as matchmaker, invited them into their home for supper. There was an immediate mutual attraction, though no follow-up date resulted. So another was arranged as a group round trip via ship to Catalina Island, including a picnic lunch that included Dr. and Mrs. Elder, their children, Patricia, Glenn, their children, as well as cousins of James and Margaret, Glenn's children, and their parents, Aunt Karen and Uncle Bill, William Shea. Two of their three children and Aunt Karen are with us today, Josephine Shea and Rebecca, I'm sorry I will pronounce this wrong, Erdele. This was Mom and Daddy's second sort of date. Glenn wanted to get to know Mother better and took the initiative. She traveled in March with LLU School of Dentistry, faculty and students to Guatemala to offer nursing care while they offered free dental services and shared their faith with impoverished inhabitants. When she returned, their courtship accelerated and they were quickly engaged and married June 13, 1971 in the Loma Linda University Seventh-day Adventist Church, with their children serving as their attendants. We were very happy and enjoyed being bridesmaids and groomsmen. Once back from their honeymoon, the two families started out as one household in the Campus Street house with Daddy Glenn and his two children, James, 13 years old, and Margaret, 12 years old. It was a bit cramped. We moved to a significantly larger house on Lawton Avenue in August 1971 after some renovations to accommodate our sizable and growing group. A home dedication service was conducted and soon thereafter with three pastors in attendance, including William Lovelace, Richard Gage, and David Osborne. Well, we were quite the group. Daddy would sometimes laughingly call our family Foster Rent-A-Crowd. In the interest of time, please refer to the obituary online for a list of Mom's academic and community accomplishments. She always strove for excellence in whatever she did. She was president of the LLU Medical Auxiliary 1996 to 1997. She also served on the school board at Loma Linda Academy and was its president during the 1977-1978 school year. Entertaining large groups in our house on Lawton Avenue was a frequent occurrence. She held a reception dinner for each group of resident physicians Daddy was teaching at the time. Also assisted with planning for cardiology department boating trips to Lake Mojave and Lake Havasu. In spring 2016, she was hospitalized for an intestinal blockage which necessitated emergency surgery. And a little after that, she had to have another surgery because of adhesions that had built up. After more than 6 months of continuous inpatient stay, she finally was able to return to her home and lived there nearly continuously until she died on Christmas Day, this past Christmas. She and Daddy celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary on June 13, 2021 at home with a few of her children present in person and the others for a Zoom video visit.
Some of Mom's favorite things: every other week, family Zoom meetings, thanks to Margaret, with her children and extended family members at sometimes, visits from her children and friends, including the Grains, Esther Wood, and others via phone, visits with Pastor Resser and his wife, and so many of the rest of you. She enjoyed watching the LLU SDA Church early services on Sabbath mornings, and on Saturday nights would watch older reunion programs that featured popular singers such as Del Delker and the Heritage Singers. She kept up with the news and read the LA Times newspaper. She also enjoyed reading the Chronicle of Higher Education articles in the New Yorker magazines. And she could read faster than just about anybody I know except for my younger sister. She could whip through books, almost rivaled her ability to down ice cream cones. and she enjoyed reading very, very much.
Rabbits. How she loves them, especially figurines, stuffed toy rabbits, pictures of them, photos as well as drawings and paintings of them. I think this started in her 20s when she heard a joke she especially liked about a, quotes, retarded rabbit, who was unable to grasp the concept of multiplication from a mathematic rather than reproductive standpoint. Roses, especially red and pink colored ones. She once told me that she had difficulty going to sleep at night. When she had difficulty going to sleep at night, it calmed her to say Jesus softly several times to herself and encouraged me to do this when I had the same problem. It meant a lot to me. For some reason unknown to me, she said she wanted to just share this privately. She had a very deep and abiding faith in Jesus Christ, our Heavenly Father, and the Holy Spirit.
A delightful author, David James Duncan, writes that God laughs and plays. And so, as the body and mind erode and decay on a determined path toward the worst of indignities, on occasion a bright new pinnacle of dignity shines bright. A few weeks before passing, Mom called to Sarah, her caretaker, and whispered with excited, girlish confidence, "I'm seeing someone. I think we're going to get married." Sarah smiled. Just then, Dad walked around the corner and entered the room. Mom smiled and whispered, cupping her cheek, "Look, there he is." teachers shared what may be his most important commandment. Unless you become as a child, you cannot enter the kingdom. I think Mom was very close.
She is missed and always will be by her husband, children, and other extended family, friends, and colleagues. Thank you for allowing us to offer a glimpse of her life and her essence.
As I listen to my siblings and I see the photographs here, I'm reminded of my mother's smile, and those of you who knew her, how infectious that smile was and how warm. I teach my son, who is in the back, about to be 10, that love is not a feeling and it is not an action. It is a way of being in the world. It is who we are. And my mother was love in who she was. And she gave us all that. And those of you who worked with her also felt that and who were friends with her. As you know, she was in hospice for some time, and she had many moments where we thought, this was the moment. And a little over a year ago, when we had one of those moments, I wrote a poem that I will share with all of you, called As She Leaves. As she leaves, for my mother. The leaves gleam with a light, curved, almost like hands pulling back to shield their palms, unfingered, yet grasping the fruits of sun and wind. Each branch an arm that might terminate, except to promise one bud more, one opening that might yet drag water from stem and trunk and roots, from soil thirsty, yet not knowing what release might mean. This is not a day for song. The ululations of sparrow and quail pitch themselves almost to the scales of joy, and yet the day itself seems almost to weep up from the gutters, collecting last night's rain, the bark and twigs shivering moisture onto grass and walks and ears. I shudder as if a squall were passing through the spaces between my bones, and I murmur as if my hands were art like leaves, holding my hips and ribs and heart, not knowing how much we will extend and glimmer, not knowing what the fingered ground will offer me to drink, or teach me yet that love is neither virtue nor emotion, but rather the attention to our being within more being, in the shapes and shimmers that touch and try for more. Thank you for being here with your love and our love to celebrate our life.
Pat Foster was many things. Wife, mother, inspiration, friend, academic. In one of the defining moments of her life, Pat found herself the matriarch of a blended brood of 6 children. She handled it the way she did most things, very well. And early in their marriage, Pat and Glenn planned to take a river raft trip on the Snake River. I think Gina was about 3 years old then, too young for the trip. Then one day, during family prayers, Gina prayed, "Help me not to fall in the river." I think Pat and Glenn must have exchanged looks then. They knew Gina was planning to go on that river trip. And she did, under the supervision of 5 siblings and 2 parents and a guardian angel. In the 70s, Pat introduced our parent-teacher people to parent effectiveness training. We learned active listening and iMessages, and Pat was astute at those things. On a trip, carpooling the family kids and their friends home from school, would you believe, the noise got to a level that was untenable. Pat pulled the car over, parked, and waited for them to notice. And when they did, she had her iMessage ready to deliver. "I can't drive in the midst of all this clamor." And the rest of the trip home was very quiet and pleasant. I remember one Christmas when Pat prepared tickets for each of the members of the family. They were good for an hour of sharing with Pat. No disturbance. And this 101 thing, I can remember her saying, so-and-so and so-and-so have already cashed in their time with me. I credit Pat with supporting me in my tenured appointment at La Sierra University. Let's do a critical thinking conference presentation, she suggested to me. I've been attending these critical thinking meetings for years. It never occurred to me that I could be a presenter, but Pat helped implement it, and there we were creating symposiums. Some of them developed into tenured publications. I appreciate Pat for supporting me so beautifully as we began those events together. It was always a pleasure to work with Pat. Glenn too, for that matter. They were a great team, actually, in their intellectual pursuits. I recall Pat's juxtaposing a trip that we were going to take to New York for one of the meetings with a visit to me in Pennsylvania. I was living in Reading, Pennsylvania at the time. You may not realize that at that time, Reading was the shopping capital of the world for, as you found out, it was outlet malls were on every block. And Pat showed up at my house prepared for a presentation, but we spent a couple of days doing the shops. And I think perhaps we managed to satisfy her enthusiasm for shopping during those 2 days. On our trip to New York, we were driving in a car that we had borrowed because our car was in the shop, and my husband was driving it, and the car turned out to be very sick. It died in the Holland Tunnel. And we had the honor of the attendants on us. And Pat was not mystified by the problems with that car. She said, I once had a car like this. Let me try it. Well, my husband wouldn't switch seats in that dangerous traffic, but he took her counsel, and she helped that car to cough and lurch out of the tunnel and to the hotel. My more recent visits to the foster home, I found Pat very alert to what was going on in the world, in our community, and in her friends' families. She was just staying in tune. And she always sent me home with a book, a very stimulating book. So I have a stack of books from Pat that have nourished me through the years. It's been a very good, happy relationship. I must say to Pat, I love you, and I look forward to the day when we can renew our friendship at the great waking up.
It is indeed an honor to be able to talk a little bit about Dr. Pat Foster today. I was invited because I was probably one of her more mystifying students when she started teaching at Loma Linda School of Nursing. I remember we all met together on the 6th floor amphitheater. It was just before the school moved. And as students, we were sort of a wiggly bunch with a limited concentration. And we watched all of these faculty come in and introduce themselves. And as a student, I remember thinking, oh, what a shame they're so old and they're so sort of stodgy, and I'm sure they don't enjoy life anymore. Well, that was not true, not for our faculty. And Pat Gillett, she was at that time, and then she married Dr. Foster. She was involved with our class for all kinds of different things, including capping. And you know, when you think sometimes that people are very serious and they don't have a sense of humor, well, she did. I had suggested that for the special music for the candle lighting ceremony, we use that great anthem, Come On Baby, Light My Fire. I think some of you will remember that from many, many years ago. And she really did laugh at that. She thought that was quite funny. But the things I learned from her that very first year were the fact that she was lovely, poised, elegant. She believed in the students. She loved her family and her God and what she could do for God. And she wanted to be a good role model for us. And she was. She was an excellent role model. Well, I went off to work and then came back for graduate school. And meantime, Dr. Foster had gone for her doctoral degree, and that was very inspiring. As colleagues and as other students there, we found the fact that she was able to maintain a family, do all of the things that she did, and earn her doctoral degree. It was really inspiring. And she was one of the early School of Nursing faculty to get their degrees, and so we were very proud of her. I went to work for Kaiser for quite some time and then came back. I was actually sort of lured there by Dr. Helen King to come back to the School of Nursing. And I came back and became a junior faculty. And Dr. Pat Foster was my associate dean at that time. And once again, I found that there was so much I could learn from her. I learned a lot about her ability to process things, multitask. I learned again that one of the reasons she acted as she did, well-dressed, poised, elegant, is that she believed that by doing so, she was showing respect for her students, her colleagues, and her profession. And that was good, that was special. She still had a good sense of humor. I had the very poor taste of making a suggestion in a meeting. She was wanting to do some research with the GI lab at the School of Nursing, and I said, oh, that would be lovely. We could call the research the Stool of Nursing. And that was a little bit shocking, but she laughed. She did have a good sense of humor. And I then, to follow her lead, I went for a doctoral program myself. I commuted to San Diego. I lived in Loma Linda, in Anaheim Hills, and so commuted out here every day. You'd never believe how many miles a little blue BMW can get on the freeway before it explodes. It was always a pleasure and an honor to work with Dr. Pat Foster. I want to tell her, I want her family to know how much she meant to us as students and as colleagues.
I'm Bonnie Myers, and I first met Dr. Patricia Foster when she hired me a little over 40 years ago to work at the School of Nursing. I was young and excited to be teaching, and I discovered right away that she had really high expectations for her students, for us, and for herself. And she wanted to stay on top of everything. She loved to be in the know. She wasn't an absent leader. She knew what was going on. She asked us all to send copies of the minutes when we had course planning meetings. And I remember early on, I was taking minutes at one of the course planning meetings, and I thought, you know what, there's no way she has time to read these minutes. And I couldn't resist the temptation to sneak in a little paragraph about the price of slippers in Alaska, expecting that she'd never see. The next morning, I got a call from the dean's office. Guess what? She did read the minutes. She did a lot more than read the minutes. She was an amazing teacher. I never took a class from her, but one of my friends who did said her classes were unforgettable. Students were up and moving around and actively involved, and she told about this one class where the buttermilk lovers were all lined up on one side of the room, and the non-buttermilk, or buttermilk haters, maybe I should call them, were on the other side of the room, and the class was on persuasion, and so the lovers were to convince the haters to sample this buttermilk. But the buttermilk lovers, when it came time for the experiment, they were horrified to discover that she actually had colored the buttermilk blue, so their task was going to be much harder than expected. She was also a really strong leader, very supportive, genuine interest in the teachers, and she was very compassionate. One of my colleagues, peers, and friends whose mother became very seriously ill, Dr. Foster took the time, and because she understood how important it was for her to be able to spend some significant time with her mother, so she rearranged the schedule, made sure her schedule was done so that she wouldn't lose money in the process, and she was just there supporting her all the way. And I also really was touched by how important my opinions were to her. Because those of you who know her know she could have pretty strong opinions herself. And in one of the meetings, she and I had very strong opposing opinions. And I was really surprised within a few minutes after the meeting, she sought me out and she said, I do want to hear you and understand better what is behind your opinion here, because I feel like you have some reason for your thoughts too. And I'd never had a leader who I disagreed with come and seek me out to understand where I was coming from. That was extremely impressive. And she was just always there for me when I was struggling with students complaining about my classes. She supported me, she guided me. When I was excited about her successes, she shared her delight with me. And I just felt that she cared about me and the students. It was a privilege to work with her.
There have been a few people who have had a significant impact on my academic life. One of these was Dr. Pat Foster. She encouraged me and many others to further our education so that we could be better prepared to teach and grow the School of Nursing. In the 1980s, there were no universities in Southern California that awarded a PhD in nursing. And since Dr. Foster had received her PhD degree from Claremont Graduate School in 1979, she invited some of their faculty to Loma Linda and strongly encouraged a number of us to pursue our studies at Claremont in higher education. I started teaching here in 1981 and worked under her leadership until 1989. Dr. Foster was a professor of nursing, associate dean for academic affairs. She always would seek our input at meetings and then counsel us on what might work well. She taught here at Loma Linda from 1968 to 1991, and then was recognized as Emeritus Professor of Nursing. Some of the changes that occurred during those years were the AS program at La Sierra became part of the School of Nursing. The school joined Sigma Theta Tau, which is the honor society for nursing, and received full accreditation from the National League for Nursing. In 1982, Dr. Foster supported the inauguration of the Learning Assistance Program, which has, with Dr. Vanita Condon's leadership, provided extra academic support for students having educational difficulties. Even after she retired, she continued to help the school. Dr. Pat Jones told me that in 1999, Dr. Foster contributed a special seminar for 4 nursing students from Mongolia. She designed the seminar for nursing in higher education and did an excellent job teaching the course. Dr. Jones said that she had always appreciated Dr. Foster's doing this. Her life has left a major impact on many of the lives of faculty and students at Loma Linda University School of Nursing.
It was 1958, 64 years ago, in post-war Germany, that my husband, Sergeant Arlen Borg, X-ray tech, assigned to the U.S. hospital, Army Hospital, in Munchweiler. Arlen met the commander of the emergency department, Captain Charles Gillett, a CME graduate. They soon discovered their common Adventist ancestry. This was the beginning of a social bonding of other Adventist servicemen and their wives assigned to the German occupation. Charlie wanted the Borgs to meet his wife Pat and his daughter Terry, and of course the Mary Stokes family and others in their assignment in a foreign land. Many fond memories were created as a group of sojourners met on Saturday nights at Mary Stokes' place, she's here today, and for fun, games of grilled cheese sandwiches and healthy desserts. A special memory was created when Pat and Charlie took time off for a short European sightseeing trip. Arlen and I had the pleasure of babysitting Terry during their time of leisure. A memorable highlight occurred was when childless Arlen spontaneously exclaimed, after 3 days of exposure to the innocence of childhood, "Terry is the best little girl I've ever met." The German experience faded into history. The years quickly passed with the accumulation of many challenges until our paths again crossed, this time in Loma Linda. A widowed Pat met Glenn Foster, and a new love wrought the miracle, the blending of 2 beautiful families. In the passing of the years, we have kept in touch by phone, person, and milestone events. But perhaps most effective has been Glenn's annual Christmas greetings, recording through photos the maturing of their blended family. I'll always remember Pat's warm, affectionate smile, her commitment to her family, her teaching career, and to the church. Pat's remarkable life has interacted with many people, her family, friends, teachers, and students, which can be reflected so beautifully by the poem written by my mother Ruth after 88 years of meaningful living, is concluded in these lines, and it's, "Who am I?" It was Christ who made me. He loved his child so much that I longed to make him happy and to feel his loving touch. That reassures me always when I wonder who I am, that he gave his life to save me. So no matter what I lack, if I repent sincerely, he will surely fill the gap. So when heaven's doors are open, he'll be there to welcome me. Where no ear has ever heard or no eye has ever seen the wonders that he's prepared for me. To make me really free,
I'll feel no pain or sorrow. I'll never feel the need to ask the question, who am I?
They tell us that there's another service here at 1:30, so we've got to cut it short. But my personal remembrances for Pat and Glenn were when we were in Hawaii on vacation a few years ago, and we were eating breakfast out on the patio there of the restaurant, and Pat and Glenn wandered by and stopped and talked to us. We knew them, but that got us better acquainted, and we went out to dinner that night and later back here, and that really made a strong impression on us. But it continued, that friendship, and Pat was always interested in what was going on in the church and with our family. She was indeed a woman ahead of her time in being focused on encouraging equality for both women and men in their professions. But I want to share just a little passage of scripture from 1 Thessalonians 4. Brothers and sisters, we do not want you to be uninformed about those who sleep in death, so that you do not grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope. And the reason is we do have hope, and that hope is in Jesus Christ. And that's what the next verse says. For we believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. And that passage gives us hope for the future. And we pray that Glenn and family and all of you will have that hope of seeing Pat again.
I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. At the last trumpet, the trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible. The trumpet shall sound. And the dead shall
What a great hope that is. The trumpet will sound. Let us pray. Our loving Father, we're so thankful that we have hope in Jesus. We have hope in your resurrection and hope in the soon coming of Jesus. I pray that you will be with Glenn and all the family members as they are meeting with mourning and sorrow, but that they may keep that hope in their heart and in their life. For we ask these things in your name. Amen. Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. They will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them. I think that is very fitting for that. And as we gathered here by Pat's final resting place, although this is temporary, the ground is too wet to open it up in this point. So her final resting place will be right here, near here. Her influence will follow her through our lives as long as we are alive. And the difference that she made in our life, we will take with us. Paul says, "Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall all be changed." That will be a glorious day when that happens, when that comes about. And Pat now rests in the care of our loving Savior, and we look forward to that great resurrection morning. What a glorious day that will be. And let us pray. Lord, we're thankful that we can come to you right now. We're thankful for the comfort that you give us and that you promise, and that for that resurrection morning that is coming, that day when there will be no more sorrow, no more death, no more suffering. And we pray that you will comfort Glenn and all those in his family. Heal the brokenhearted. Be especially with each family member. And we're thankful for the faith that Pat had and the life of service and love that she demonstrated. And may the angels mark this spot until the resurrection morning. And may the Lord keep us all in the hollow of his hand, is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. And they have flowers here that she'll be holding.
For those of you who wish to.
And if you want to leave it on the casket.
Family and friends, we will be doing the flower tribute. First, let the immediate family go first and everybody else to follow. So if I could have the children and husband first, as well as grandchildren.
And that would be you.
Placing it on. Bye.
Going to put a flower for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just behind you is another relative. So this is Margaret's daughter to your left.
If anyone else would like to come up, you may do so.
I think so.
We live in New Rochelle, which is just north of the city, north of New York City. And I work in New York City. And this is my son. Okay.
What?
His name is Polo Lee.
Yeah, that's quite the hair.
Sometimes he looks just like my mom. Sometimes he acts just like my mom. It's good to see you.
Yeah, I'm too wobbly with what that says.
So grateful you're here.
Your dad walks a little bit better.
Margaret's husband. You know, I had both my knees replaced, so I have every assistive device practically out there. I feel your pain.
Yes. Oh, are you ready for them to take? I went before you.
Yeah.
Yeah. 4 times I did. Yes. You got sent one, got sent before yours.
Oh no. I'm so sorry.
Family and friends, I just want to thank everyone for being here today and honoring the memory of Miss Patricia. Again, at this time, the family needs you the most, so please continue visiting them, calling them. It means a lot to them. And continue the memory of Miss Patricia. I just want to thank everyone for being here, and God bless.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
This is Dr. Graves, and this is Mrs. Graves, and they are good friends of